Woosa, wake up South Africa. You've been sleeping far too long. Wake up South Africa. Now come along and sing this song. Wake up South Africa.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees, and Hare Krishna to our guest speaker, His Grace Brhat Mrdanga Prabhu. Thank you so much for all joining us today. So thank you, Prabhu. Over to you. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. It's nice to be here. I'd just like to invoke the mercy of our predecessor acharyas. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjala Shilakya Chakshur Militamina Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtang Shtapitang Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Vidamayang Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalang Shri Gurun Vaisnavangsha Shri Rupang Sagrajatang Sagna Raghunatang Vitam Tang Sajivam Satvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinogando Jagatpate Gobisha Gobika Kantarada Kanta Namosute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vangshakalpa Turbhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So when I joined university in Stellenbosch 2007, I studied the Bachelor of Science degree, and I remember clear as daylight the first biology class that I was in. The first year in university is quite broad. They kind of introduce you to all the things you could specialize in. So everybody was doing the same thing in first year. It doesn't matter which like BSc that you were doing. So everybody was having biology. And the first class of biology was entitled, What is Life? So they basically, being science, they're trying to quantify everything. They want to be able to put a ruler or some kind of test so that they can objectively analyze what is what. And one of these things is they want to know what is life. So there were some categories that they were going through. For example, they said, something that is alive grows. So then they found that it was not such a good category to use because there are certain living things which grow so slowly that you can't actually measure it. And you have to wait for a long period of time to be able to actually witness some type of growth. So it's not really effective, because if you want to know now what is if this thing is alive or not, you don't want to wait 50 years before you can make that conclusion. So they said, okay, we can say, okay, everything that's alive grows, but this is not a good way of testing. What about reproduce? Everything that is alive can reproduce. It can make something new. So, but they found that this is also not such a good category to test whether something's alive, because some things, they just spawn. You get like, they just get buds and they make little babies like of themselves. There's like asexual reproduction. And especially if you go on a very small level where you're dealing with like microbes, then it also gets very tricky. So it's also a very gray kind of way of looking at it. So they want something very clear and cutting. So they said, okay, how about everything that's alive dies? I found that actually very interesting. I say as a side note, because scientists are actually trying to stop death. But here they're admitting that everything that is alive has to die. So, and that's kind of like a law. But anyway, I thought it was interesting. So they said, well, yes, you can say that, but in order then to define death, you have to define what is alive. So therefore, using death as a definition of what is alive is not good, because you have to define what is alive first. So you're kind of going in a circle. So they were going like this whole hour lecture like that. And the conclusion of his whole thing is that we do not know what is life. And I was thinking, I'm sitting here in biology, which means the science of life. I just paid a lot of money to be here. And the person who's going to teach me biology just tells me they don't know what life is. Like, what is this? Like, well, I wasn't so switched on then yet, but that occurred to me. I thought like, well, what else am I supposed to do? I got to do something. I guess let's just stick with it. But I kind of sussed that out. I was, no, man, there's something wrong here. And then it took me a while to get accustomed to the scientific kind of way of thinking. And I really struggled, especially with genetics. And I'll explain later why. Until I actually figured out how to understand their language, because it sounds like they're speaking English, but actually they're speaking a completely different language. And then I learned how to translate that back into the English I know. And then could actually help my classmates too who were struggling. And they do the same thing in law. You know, they call it legalese. It's English language, which is actually maritime law they're talking about. And so when you say, for example, they say when the police officer says, do you understand? They read your rights. If you say, yes, I understand, you're actually saying, I stand under your authority. So it's like a subtle kind of thing. It's so with science, it's called jargon. There's a specific way in which words are used. And if one doesn't understand it, it can be very confusing. And it is done like this by design to make it inaccessible to, I would say, the common people. The people who are not studying these things. So when I met the devotees in my second last year, the first book that was shown to me was Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, Premananda Kirtan Prabhu. He opened this book, and it was this conversation Prabhupada was having with Bob, and Bob asked Prabhupada, what is a scientist? And Prabhupada replied, a scientist is somebody who knows things as they are. And Bob said, he thinks he knows it. And Prabhupada said, no, he's supposed to know. Otherwise, how can he be called a scientist? I thought, like, that's amazing. That's exactly what science is. Science is supposed to be an objective analysis of the external world, whereas mysticism is supposed to be an analysis of your own internal subjective realm. So that's the realm of mysticism and mystic yoga. But the realm of science and Sankhya and Vaisheshika is where you are objectively analyzing the objective world, outside the external world, with the aim of trying to see what is the difference between you and everything else. Because you're trying to find the I, because there is me observing. So what is that? So science is supposed to go for that. And if you're actually aspiring for God consciousness, then this is called Gyan Yoga. This is where this pursuit of knowledge is being dovetailed in trying to understand the absolute truth. And one can get to the platform of realizing the spirit, at least the Brahman platform one can get to just through this. So I really like this statement of Srila Prabhupada, because it really I felt it captured the essence of what science is. And at that stage, I'd been exposed enough to the scientific method that I was a bit disappointed. When I entered in university, I was very excited that I'm going to make a change. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to study, I'm going to use my brain, and I'm going to change the world with science. But when I learned how the playing field works, I was very disappointed, because science, or let's rather say modern science, the way that it is appearing today, is actually not for the benefit of the people, because it is being run and managed by the demons. So they're obviously not interested in our welfare. So a little bit more on that a little bit later. So then I was thinking about this thing that the scientist is supposed to know things as they are, but the science of today. So when I say science, there should actually be a different word which they use to describe the science as applied today, because it is actually not science. It is just probability. This word probability or chance is what they usually say when you read something on the internet. But when you're doing a scientific study, use the word probability. What is the probability that a certain cause has a certain effect? So when you're mixing two things together, that is a cause, and then it is producing a certain effect. And what is the probability that these two things together is actually making what you think, what it is making, and it's not something else that's maybe interfering in there. So, and so science is, then you have your hypothesis where you say, I think if I mix A and B together, I get C as a result. And then your antithesis says that I think that is incorrect. So then actually you try and prove that right. You actually try to prove your hypothesis wrong. And if you're not able to prove the hypothesis wrong, then that means your hypothesis is correct. So this is called, it's a logical fallacy. And this is one man, what's his name? Hellep. He wrote this book called The Black Swan. I read it a few years ago. It's a really good book. And the Black Swan Black Swan means it's that thing which nobody was anticipating, which exactly that is what happened. And it comes from the historical Eurocentric kind of perspective that, before colonial era, that all swans were white. Every swan that you find, it will be white. There's no such thing as a black swan. So sometimes they actually use the phrase the black swan as referring to something that doesn't exist. And then they started colonizing the world, and they ended up in Australia, and they saw a black swan. Centuries worth of validation that no black swans existed, completely annihilated just by one single black swan that existed in Australia that they did not know before. And everybody was absolutely certain there's no such thing as a black swan. So this person who wrote this book, he says black swans, they've got these three things: that it is something which is highly improbable to happen, and that if it does happen, it has a major consequence. And thirdly, it is very easy to explain after the event. In hindsight, we've got 20/20 hindsight. After something has happened, experts, they're coming through with all this. We know what's going on, this and this and this and this. Yeah, but yesterday you were completely bamboozled. Nobody foresaw the stock exchange crash. Nobody foresaw World War I that was going to come. Nobody foresaw that everybody would be having a computer in their house today. I mean, 50, 60 years ago, they laughed at IBM. They said that, nobody will use these things. It's useless, these computers. Who's going to buy this stuff, And now everybody's got it. I mean, this is a computer right here in my hand, the cell phone. So it's a black swan. It was highly improbable, but it happened. It was not possible to foresee that it could happen. So when now going back to science, is the way that you prove your theory wrong is actually to show that the probability that it is incorrect is less than 5%. This is the standard number. They call it in statistics, they call it the p-value. The probability value is 0.05. It means there's less than 5% chance that I'm wrong. So therefore I'm right. So I think, wait a minute, but if there's a 1% chance that I'm wrong, I could still be wrong. If there's a 0.01% chance I could be wrong, I could still be wrong. I want to know for a fact what is what. Not like 2,000 years later figure out, oh, there's a black swan. Actually, I was wrong all along. And then all these years wasted. So it is, this is actually what modern science is actually all about. It's actually just probability. There's actually almost no fact. I'll say that again. It's all probability. There's hardly any fact, because they cannot have 100% of anything. I don't think, I've not heard of a study where you've had a p-value of 0, where the chance that you were wrong was 0. So, and this is what we go to school for, and we pay a lot to go to university for, to get taught that maybe things are like this. Perhaps it is like that. Yeah, experts agree that it is probable that this is actually the reality. So these experts, they're not sure themselves. They don't sound very sure to me. So therefore, we as Vaishnavas, we don't accept these things. We cannot take them seriously. Yes, they have built wonderful devices like a smartphone, or even the Zoom that I can connect to everybody across the world. Yes, they have made cars which can travel long distances, and planes that I can visit. I can go to India because of technology and science. I can go visit Mayapur in the Dam. I don't have to trek on a ox camel or ox wagon for 6 months. I don't know how long it will take to get to Mayapur. I then have to come back. So it's amazing. That's right. But Prabhupada comments on this. He says that in the name of progress, we are expanding our civilization, but we're actually with that creating so many inconveniences. So to try and solve some inconvenience, we're actually creating so many more inconveniences, and those inconveniences we had before was actually much better than the ones we have now. Like, for example, Prabhupada says they built a car, but now there's the need for all these tar roads that have to be made and maintained. And then with that comes traffic jams, which is a big stress causer. You're trying to go to work at 8 in the morning and you sit in your traffic jam. By the time you get to work, you're already fried. So it's like, what kind of convenience is this actually? So yes, the cars are nice. We use them because they are here. But otherwise, we as devotees, we don't really care for them. Like my Guru Maharaj was once asked, what about computers, And he said, we use computers so that one day we do not have to use computers. So since it is here and everybody is sitting in front of a computer, why not use a computer? Yukta Vairagya. So now I can connect to all of you. But our aim is to get rid of this rubbish, because this stuff actually, it's, I can't feel you, I can't smell you. My senses and my subtle awareness can't tap into the exchange with all of you as if we were sitting in a temple now and I'm giving like a Bhagavatam class. There's nothing like it. And then you get so much more feedback from the audience. And so it's, so it can't be replaced, but we use it since it's usable at the moment. So same way, like if you start a farm, there's a lot of work to be done before you can get ready. So use a tractor. Use a tractor so that in 1 month you've plowed scores of hectares. It's ready to be planted and everything. And then as more devotees come, as there are more people able to do work, then you get rid of the tractor, because now you have people that can do it and you need service opportunity. So I think that's a good approach to it. So then, and eventually you get the bull and you get the cow. Hari Bol, you've got everything you need. Prabhupada says, then you've solved, as far as the Prabhupada was shown one project, farm project, and showing like we're growing our grains here, we've got our cows and our milk, we've got our housing here, and Gurukul. And Prabhupada said, as far as material needs are concerned, you have solved all the problems of life. Everything else is artificially created. So I thought, like, wow, that's amazing. It's like, what kind of paradigm is that? It's we feel like, no, I need this. I need it, Prabhu. No, actually, we don't. It's we've been made to believe that we need it. It's out of artificial necessity, we need it. It's been artificially created. The need is artificially created. So in a sense, yes, we do need it now, but it is because of an artificial situation that is being created by the demons that we're forced to need these things. So we should be smart. We should try and think how to get out of it. So, so this is the actual benefit of science. Like Prabhupada also says that with science, we have created the atomic bomb and we can kill millions of people in a single moment, but they have not been able to save one single life from death. So what kind of advancement of science is this? So Prabhupada was exposing this, like right back then, even before he came to America, Prabhupada knew exactly. And the reason is because his pramanam is a Sanskrit word which means evidence. If you make a claim, you have to provide some evidence, some scientific research. And as Vaishnavas, our main pramanam is the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is our evidence. So therefore, when some devotee makes a statement, they're supposed to actually recite the verse. Well, if you don't know the Sanskrit, at least they can say the English. In the Bhagavatam, it says like this. So therefore, my statement is actually coming through the Sukhit lineage. It's not coming from my mind. So, and this is called the descending process of acquiring knowledge. In the descending process, we approach the Sukhit lineage, and as Krishna has imparted this knowledge in the different heads of the sampradayas, they get passed on from spiritual master to disciple. And then eventually we get to receive it. And then we can actually know for sure, 100%, the p-value is 0. The probability that it is incorrect, 0. So it is a fact. So you can actually say, this is a fact. This is how it is. And that's how Prabhupada came to the West. And nobody could defeat him because there was 0 uncertainty. There was 0 uncertainty. Even the topmost scientists, somewhere in the back of their head, there is a level of uncertainty because they have a p-value of more than 0. So there's uncertainty. So that means they cannot put 100% of their faith in something which is not 100% validated. They might not admit this, they might not even know it themselves, but it's there in their consciousness. It is there. So when Prabhupada came here and he said, no, this is Maya. He says, Allen Ginsberg comes to Prabhupada and says, oh, so you say the spiritual master knows everything, right? Prabhupada says, yes, yes. And he says, so how many windows in the Empire State Building? And Prabhupada says, without that skipping a heartbeat, he says, how many drops of water in the mirage? So I really like that. It's like, wow. Every time I hear some new exchange of Prabhupada where somebody challenges him, I try to predict what Prabhupada is going to respond. I've never been right before. I've never been able to guess. So Prabhupada's saying, what is this Windows and Empire State Building? It's a big Maya rubbish. And in that, he's also saying this whole civilization is just an illusion. You know, it's going to like fall soon. So what's the point? It's like 10 windows, a million windows, big deal. It's like, do you know Krishna? Do you know how to escape birth, disease, old age, and death? Wow, you're not very smart then, are you? It's like Mr. Scientist. So these scientists, they, I think for me, this is the biggest, what's the word? The biggest hole in the modern scientific approach is actually this p-value, this probability, this way in which they are validating something, because everything has to be quantified. And furthermore, there is this thing which is called scientism, which is a belief. It's actually a belief that everything can be explained empirically. It means everything can be explained by being able to measure it in some way or other. You know, the mass, the volume, the area, the pressure, the force, that you can quantify everything, and with that you can explain everything. So it's called scientism. And actually a lot of the scientists, they don't call themselves, they don't say that, oh yes, I believe in scientism. But if you look at how they're thinking, they're actually believers. They're believers in this thing called scientism, that it can explain everything. But they don't account that there's also the metaphysical. which is where quantum physics attempts to go into to some degree. And I think they're also successful to some degree. And but still, it's not conclusive, because in that realm, when you go into quantum physics, which is another side of science, it just ends up by probabilities also. It also ends up by probabilities. Like, for example, did you know that nobody actually knows what the atom looks like? And that this picture that you see is actually not what the atom looks like. It's actually a picture of probabilities, that you have a core in the middle, and then you have different, what you call it, orbits, where certain electrons can be. And there's a probability that a certain electron will be found in a certain orbit, but they actually don't have any idea where it is. They can just say it's probably here, and this one is probably over here, but this one could be there, and that one could be over here, but it's improbable, but it could still be. And then they give you this picture, and like, this is the structure of the atom. It's like, no, it's a probability of the atom. It's not the structure. It's not what it looks like. Nobody knows. Yogis can shrink themselves to the side of the atom, and they can go in the atom, and then they can tell you what it looks like. And it's probably very chaotic. So then again, it's like, even with quantum physics, and they can't actually say what's going on. One classical example of quantum physics is that Schrodinger's cat, where it's this hypothetical situation, hypothetical experiment, where you have a box, and inside the box you have a cat, and then there's a little container with some kind of toxin like cyanide, which can instantly kill the cat, and there's a trigger on the outside which can trigger the release of that toxin, and then they close the box. So now you press the button. So there is a chance that that button will malfunction, and it will not release the cyanide, and the cat will survive. Or there is a chance that some other thing which you cannot account for, some unknown, they call it. There's something which could happen, but you don't know that it could happen. You don't know what you don't know. So that's also what the Black Swan is like. People, they're not preparing for it because they're too narrow-minded, and they're thinking that, okay, these things can't happen, but they don't know it. But the only way to check whether this cat actually died or not is to open up the box and to observe whether the cat has died, right? But they say, but by doing that, you're already interfering with the experiment. And then if you go more into the metaphysical, they even say how the observer of the experiment influences the experiment. Is that the mind of the scientist has an effect on the result of the experiment. Now, that actually brings up a whole other thing. That means your small probability could actually be a bit bigger than you anticipated. So you calculated you have a small probability, but it might be bigger because of your influence of just your conscious mind projecting onto it. And like there are people who can switch lights off with their head. Somehow their mind interferes with the electromagnetic field, and then it disturbs the electronics. Especially people who are like riddled or plagued by ghosts or subtle entities. Oftentimes they've got these interfering effects on electronics. So it is so it's not very difficult actually to understand that one's mind can actually influence on a subtle level scientific research. So this thing of probability is one point, that there's probability, and that science is actually probability. It is not certainty, because there's always a little bit of uncertainty. And anybody who actually wants to know what is what, they cannot accept any level of uncertainty. If there's uncertainty, you want to be certain. What is that? What is this? So otherwise, you can't call yourself a scientist, because you don't actually know how it is. You just think you know how it is. As Bob was saying, when he was actually kind of reflecting, the consciousness of the scientists. And this other thing is also, the second point is the jargon. And jargon means, as I said before, the type of language that scientists like to use. And there's a lot of stuff locked inside words. And I would say my most powerful personal example of that was I was speaking with one person about evolution. And I was saying that, speciation doesn't occur. One species has never been observed to have actually split into two species who can't interact with each other anymore. And I said, if you can show me one instance of speciation happening, then I might actually start believing that, maybe evolution is true. And because there's evidence of people trying it. For example, evolution doesn't happen over a long period of time. It happens over many generations. It happens over 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 generations. And if you can study something that is a very short generation, like bacteria, which some person did, then you can actually very quickly come to a result. Like this one person, he incubated one single line of E. coli bacteria. It's a bacteria that lives in your gut. And every 20 to 30 minutes, a new generation is made. So he kept this line going for 50 years. So you can calculate how many thousands of generations were there, more than enough time for the mechanisms of evolution to take place. And at the end of the research, he found that it's still exactly the same thing that he had 50 years ago. Nothing new came up, no new novel traits. It's an immotile bacteria. It means they don't have a little tail that they can swim around with. They're still immotile. They can still only do what they could do before and nothing extra. And he said, but if any change was there, it was actually a degradation in its abilities. It actually went backwards. So I think that's a very good experiment. So this friend of mine, he sent me a scientific journal about the speciation of malaria, where there was they observed malaria virus speciating into two different lines which could no longer reproduce with each other. So, and I read this thing through, and it was very, very convincing. Actually, it looked like, wow, it seems like this actually happened. But I had the Pramanam of Bhagavatam, which says that this actually is not a fact, that speciation evolution does not happen. So I was looking at it, I was trying to find out where is the hole. And it was actually in the statistical analysis. Now let's just make this point, that when you're doing an experiment, you're getting all this data, which is just tables full of numbers of various stuff. And it doesn't make any sense yet. It's just numbers. And you have to somehow formulate some sense from all these numbers, from all this data that you have gotten, and that you can put it on a nice graph so you can explain it to people. So this is where statistics comes in, which is also pretty much a made-up field. I won't get into that too much now, but this Black Swan author talks about statistics a lot, and how he says that actually, statistics is rubbish. It is actually rubbish. And and there's this one word in this article that I read, which they said, we applied this statistical method, and the super soul was guiding me. He said, check that out. So I Googled this thing. And in a nutshell, what the statistical method is you take your data, you fit it on a pre-assumed model of evolution. I hope you understand where this is going. And then the data you get back, then you get this model, and you get this phylogeny tree, which actually shows where they split off and how they are different genetically. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. So in order for you to prove that there was speciation, first you have to assume that it exists, that it's true. That's an ABC. That's one of the first logical fallacies you learn about. It's circular reasoning. It is it's like, that's not science. That's speculation. This whole thing is rubbish. Throw it out the window. And this is a peer-reviewed article, which is another thing about science. So it's like, how can you take this thing seriously? This person has to first assume that it's true to be able to prove that it's true. So that's not science. That's not proper reasoning. So I thought, wow, this whole thing, which is actually a really big hole in this research, was hidden in one single word inside this document. And if the super soul hadn't guided me to go and check it out, I would never have known. So it is like, they're very sneaky like that. And this whole system is set up like that to make it seem very convincing. So it is, but if one has firm faith in the Bhagavatam, you'll never be bewildered by these things, because you know what is reality. you know for a fact, and then you can immediately spot. You might not know why it's not wrong, but you'll know it's wrong because the Bhagavatam says so, which pretty much means because Krishna said so. The Bhagavatam is Krishna in the book form, so so you should have it in your house. And so I was saying about statistics, which is actually a data filter. And in statistics, this whole dogma of science has been woven in. So as the data filters through the statistics, what you are receiving is actually a preconceived idea which happened before the experiment even began. So also not very scientific. And then that coupled with the fact that there is still a little bit of uncertainty, makes the whole case much weaker. And then I think maybe one or two things. The other thing is that there is also this thing called peer-reviewed. When you do a study, and you have your journal, then it's supposed to be reproducible, because this is one thing about science, that if I do an experiment and you do the experiment and everybody follows the recipe exactly the same, then you have to get your same result. So this is called peer review. But these people are also following the same method as this person. And also, these people are being funded by people who have profit in mind, not progress. So, which is another thing. If you see, when you start unpacking it, you actually get to see how much darkness is there in the modern scientific realm. It's like you just touch one thing and like a whole bunch of spiders just start jumping out, It's not just one little thing. It's like a whole Pandora's box, which has been neatly sealed and covered behind like a whole bunch of, I would say, barriers to make it hard for common people to like penetrate through. So there's this thing of being peer reviewed. And even if your thing is true, if you do not get the support of your peers, then your findings will never be published in a place where people can access it. So that means it just gets swept under the rug like that. So so that's another thing. And this thing about funding too is that if you want to do a research, how it works is you conduct an experiment to research something, right? Something new. You first doing your research about pre-existing things which have been discovered, and then you see some kind of trend which you want to investigate. You think, oh, I think this will reveal something about whatever I'm trying to study. So then you make a proposition. You say, oh, this is why I want to do it. This is what I saw. This is why I think this might be good. We will learn something from this. And then, but now you need money. You need lots of money for a lab space. You need the equipment. You need the consumables. You need workforce to pay people. So then you have to get a sponsor. You have to get funding for it. And if you're not a very wealthy millionaire, then you're going to have to depend on others. And who are you going to go to for funding? Most of the funding comes from like big pharmaceutical companies, big corporations, big fat cats who want to make money. That's all they're after, is the money. And if you're going to come to them, let's say, with a proposition of saying, I think I can cure cancer. From this, it's actually very, very reasonable that just a little bit of research, just if you give me $10 million, I'll find the cure for cancer. Who's going to give you that money? It's not profitable to cure cancer because chemoradiation therapy is a lot of money. It costs a lot. And for people to keep coming back, and hospital makes money. The people who produce these chemicals and these medicines, they make money. So it's like, why would they want to cure cancer? They're not going to fund you. You're not going to find that funding. So most mainstream research is being funded by people who want to make profit, not progress. So therefore, a lot of I would say, beneficial research has just been swept away. There are now more kind of private fundings and things like that going on, but still they have to compete in the same playing field where, peer-reviewed articles is basically law. If it's not peer-reviewed, you're a quack, and like that. Is that there's also I would say, peer pressure. There's peer pressure to adhere to a certain dogma and to adhere to a certain scientific narrative. And there's plenty of examples. You can check this documentary. It's an old documentary called Expelled, No Science Allowed. I think that's what it's called. And it's basically a documentary about scientists who pursued science, but because it was not supporting the narrative and the dogma, they got expelled, they got ostracized, and violently. It's like people who have PhDs, who've been teaching at top universities, they've been given credit for like top research, and overnight, they're just nobody. He's a quack. He's just like some kind of, I don't know, leftist or Marxist, or they just label all these things on the person and then just say like he's got zero credibility. And then every time this person comes up, this name comes up, this is actually called the rotting fish approach. It's something they use in propaganda. I read in Soviet Russia, a lot of journalists, they were trained to do these things. They use it against the enemy. And the rotting fish approach is that you create some kind of scandal about a person. It doesn't even have to be true. It just has to be extreme, like child molestation, or rape, or murder, or embezzling thousands of millions, even if it's completely untrue. And later it's even proved to be untrue. But what happens is that every time that person's name comes up in conversation, the question comes, did he do it or not? And they're not even talking about what this person is actually sharing, what perspective they have to share. So this contaminates that whole thing. So they do this in the scientific field also, is that they smear the reputation of good scientists because they're not supporting the mainstream narrative. And these people are also people like us. They need to make money. They have families to feed. They've got rent to pay. So they need this money. So a lot of those people, they just bow their head and say, yes, master. Okay, I'll throw it in the bin. We'll make like it never happened. So that's also going on. Also a bit less now than it was before, but it is like that. So as you can see, this is actually, I would say, how the broader field of academia works. This is not just science, it's just one single faculty. But academia itself is actually, it's called the rotten fish. And that was the Russian translation of it. So academia itself is riddled with all of these kind of things, these little hurdles you have to jump through, these checkpoints, these things which actually prohibit progress. That somebody who has an idea and wants to go with it, they can't, because of many different reasons. So in that way, people just end up actually you're studying science, you think, okay, I'm going to be like intelligentsia. And actually, when you get a science degree, you actually end up just working like a Sudra in a basement lab somewhere. You're just following like a recipe. It's actually Sudra work. It's not Brahman work. It's like, what do you mean? No, Brahman work means you can understand what is Brahman. You can see what is spirit and what is matter. But these scientists, they just like basically working in a sweatshop. But instead of clothes, they're just making extracting enzymes which they send to be made into perfume, or they are purifying a certain protein which is required in the processing of some type of medicine or cream or something like that. So actually, you're not really doing much. It is Sudra work. So it is. So I was very glad that I got out of that, because towards the end of my studies, I was actually feeling a little bit bleak. I was wondering, where do I want to go into? Biochemistry was my favorite because I felt it was the most hard science. But I was thinking, but what am I going to do with it? I realized I'm just going to be sitting in this basement lab, just repeating another person's recipes, and it's not very exciting. So it is a bit glad, thankfully, Srila Prabhupada, he came and gave me an alternative. So then I became a real scientist. And that's why I decided to become a brahmachari and just dedicate my life to spiritual sciences. And now I think being in a family situation, I'm very, very glad and grateful that I've got some direction. I've got some Shakti to steer this family ship somewhere, know where to go. It's like, I know where to get the answers. It's actually nice. I remember as a child, you're asking questions and nobody's answering your question satisfyingly. And you're like, oh, but what about that? But this doesn't make sense. And people can't explain it. And they just say, shh, 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 shh. It's like, shh. It's like, no, can't you see? It's like, and then, but I feel that now I can actually tell my children, yeah, I have all the answers. And the ones I don't know, I can tell you where to get it. I can tell you who to speak to. I can tell you which book to read. And then let's do it together, actually, because if I don't know, I also want to know. So let's go find out. So it's really nice. And I can see it how my children are absorbing that knowledge because it makes sense. Because it makes sense to them. There's no uncertainty. It's like a child does not whimsically accept things. I think we've seen this. Like a child does not have a problem saying like, no. You say there's a whole thing speaking for an hour and they, no. They might not know, but just intuitively inside, they can just like, that doesn't make sense. So in that sense, we should also be a little bit like children like that. And Prabhupada says this is actually a function of buddhi, of intelligence, is to be skeptical. And that, but once one has actually found the proper source of knowledge, then that skepticism is no longer required. So it is, it's like that. So this is a very big topic, and I hope that I've just kind of scratched a little bit of these scabs open, covering the science kind of sector, and show you that it's not as solid as they say it is at all. It's not as solid, and it's really, really, especially if you look into evolution. Evolution is like a hollow egg. You know, you just tap it and just it falls to pieces. There's nothing inside. There's no substance. It is it's ridiculous, but people are fighting so hard. So, but also, and I'll conclude with this, that the reason why it is like this is because there are asuras which are trying to control the world. There are asuras which are trying to exploit the people, and they don't care about anybody but themselves. You know, asuras are even willing to kill their own children. So what to speak about us? So it is, and Prabhupada also said that the world is being run by rakshasas. So we should not be surprised that these things happen, and it is Kali Yuga, it's normal to happen. And I think at least I hope that I've broken your faith a little bit in the modern scientific method. That it's just to like loosen that grip, because that grip is like the subtle hand which is here at the back of your neck, which you don't know about because it's been conditioned into us since we've been gone into school. It's been conditioned into us, the way we're thinking and interacting with each other. It's all impersonal. It's all based on man came from a monkey. It's all based on this scientific way of approaching things. And it's affecting all our interactions with each other. And so it is, we have to demolish it. We have to demolish it. Prabhupada was so against the scientists. He said, these scientists, they are useless. To kick them in the face with a shoe, that is all. They can do nothing good. These biologists and so-called scientists, they're useless. I like that. I like that. Hare Krishna. So maybe we can take some questions or comments. It is,
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Wow, that was really eye-opening class. Really, really cool. So yeah, we have some comments, some questions, a hand up. So I think everyone's super eager to get into this. So the first comment from Bafana, which maybe you can just, also comment on. So he says, nothing has attracted me more to Srila Prabhupada more than arguments and discourses supported by scientific facts, validating and given reliability of such arguments. As it is, I'll only leave Prabhupada for another spiritual master if only facts against the scientific facts provided in the Bhagavatam is outsmarted. And Prabhupada gave us the platform to stand on and lean on as the Bible verse in Psalm 23. Your staff and rod, they comforted me. And then he goes on to say, it's difficult to be rigorous without subjectivity in all, if not most, scientific methodologies for research. It's discouraging on a high level because it is bound to need explanations to contain limitations of the research truth.
mm-hmm. Oh, that's very nice. That is, with that, we should not be ashamed to give the version of the Bhagavatam as it is. And I think that, and people appreciate that. Over the New Year's festival, there was this 5-day trance party. So I went there to go and preach, and I was distributing prasadam, We sold some books as well, and there were some really sincere people who came. And there was this one person, he came there and he started speaking, and he bought a chant to be happy, and he sat down. He said, "I'm not a big reader. I can't." So he avoided the bigger books. And he sat down there for a good hour, just reading through this book. And he picked up and he said, "I'm going to read the rest of this now." So he goes to his tent. And this is a festival where people pay a lot of money to come and jive, and it's in the forest. It was quite a nice setting. And so then, he said for 4 hours, he said he was sitting in his tent reading this book at this festival. And he came back, he finished it, and he bought another book. He bought Easy Journey to Other Planets. And then he finished that book also. And then he came back and he bought a Bhagavad Gita, he bought an SSR, he bought 2 or 3 other small books. And we had long conversations. He was like really, he was really, really inspiring. And so yesterday he sent me a message, and he was just saying how, kind of giving his experience of me, which is quite interesting because I don't get to see that perspective much from their side. And he was saying how he could see that I was very, very firm, like in what I believe, and that I sincerely felt that what I believe is actually the best for everybody. But at the same time, that I understood that that not everybody's ready for it, and they're at their level where they are at, and that I'm holding space for that, and that I'm just happy to accept them wherever they are at, you know. And I thought, like, wow, that's amazing. That's really Prabhupada's mood, you know. That doesn't come, you don't generate that yourself. That's something that you acquire, like from your spiritual master and from the disciplic lineage. And how, like Prabhupada came with the comment, he came with this, just like fact, but with a completely open heart as well. Not like coming to Bible bash, you know, but with this open heart and understanding. Because remember what he prayed when he got to Boston Harbor? These people are completely covered by the modes of passion and ignorance. How will they understand the message of the Bhagavatam? He says it's actually not possible. What am I going to do? You know, they can't understand anything. They're useless. But my Lord, you, if you want, you can make them understand. So this was his prayer. And then with that mood, he walked in like a master, like a general, like a warrior, and with no fear. And nobody could stand up to him. Nobody would withstand him. And it is right with that. So you must take that. I really like that you feel like that. So develop that. It said that the difference between the Kanishta and the Madhyama Adhikari, the beginner and the medium level, is that the Kanishta can very easily be defeated, and their faith can be rattled. So, and they can even be convinced otherwise. But the Madhyam, he says the Madhyam sometimes can convince others, sometimes he cannot, sometimes he can be defeated, but his faith will never be shattered. His faith will always be strong, and they cannot convince him. So he can convince others sometimes, and other times he's not able to. But he's strong on the position he is. And Prabhupada says at least we should come to that platform, have that type of faith in the Bhagavatam, that we can, and also think about it, how to present it. Thank you. That's a nice comment.
Wow, really, really nice answer. And from Savya Satya Prabhu, he says, Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for this most wonderful association. Please comment on the bias of the scientists on the results that they arrive to when they are researching. How do they deal with findings that don't match their bias, or the results they are looking for?
Sometimes you might find scientists that actually authentically have the right scientific mood, and then they will take that and they're like, okay, I have to go back to the drawing board. But that doesn't happen so a lot. We don't see it so much. A lot of the times people just, there's like a box and it says anomalies. I don't know if you know what the word anomaly means. It means something which is like weird, it's unexplainable, it's out of place, it's not supposed to be there. So they just put it in there. For example, they are digging in a layer, like archaeologists. They're digging down in Michael Cremo, Ruta Karma Prabhu's Hidden History of the Human Race, Forbidden Archaeology. He talks about some of these examples. And like you know, the different layers of the earth, you can date them certain thousands or millions of years ago. So now they're digging in a layer of earth, let's say it's like 1 million years ago, in the era where humans didn't exist. And in that layer, they find a perfectly spherical metal ball, which has been, you can actually prove it's been forged, and it's also got this straight line, 2 lines running around it. I think this was found in South Africa. I forget where it was, somewhere in Transvaal or somewhere there. They found one of these things. And basically, this thing was found, which was made by a human, was found in a layer which was predates, you know, supposedly the time when humans existed. So what was their response? Oh, no, we misdated the layer because this thing cannot exist then, because humans did not exist then. Therefore, we made a mistake. So this date of this layer should actually be 200,000 years ago. Okay, that's better. This is how they do it. This is the bias. It's like, come on, man. It's like, it's obvious what you're doing. And there's many examples of this. It's just not one. This hidden history of the human race is basically a whole collection of, I don't know which way around, but the one is a summary study of the other book. The one book is 900 pages big. And it's just all these cases of all these things which ended up in the anomalies box because of things like that. And then other people try to explain how natural forces could create this sphere, and it's really kind of not very strong arguments. So I think in that way the bias is rife. It is this bias. But regarding that thing, you know, I always aspired to be unbiased, and I always thought like, yes, I want to be unbiased. I want to be, because that's, you know, a scientist. But then I read this quote, Srila Prabhupada. He said that, you know, some devotee was asking him, now, what about if people, you know, we're giving the version of the Bhagavatam, but they say that we're biased? And then Prabhupada said, yes, we're biased. We're biased on the version of the Bhagavatam. Yeah. He's like, what's the problem? He said, everyone is biased. You cannot be unbiased. So that's like, wow. It is complete maya to think that I should become unbiased. You know, I should be biased for the Bhagavatam. Yes, I'm biased for the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam says so. Okay, that's it. I accept. I'm biased. Everything I'm going to look at, I'm just going to accept that. What I can explain with the Bhagavatam. So that is so in that way, we should be biased, but Bhagavatam biased. So Jai, thank you.
Cool. Bhagavatam bias. That's really cool. So Bongasipu Prabhu, he's got his hand up. Yes, so let's see if you can unmute yourself.
Oh, am I unmuted? Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribol.
I think you've already like perfectly answered my question, by the way, when you were addressing Mafana Prabhu's comment. But my question is, I'm still learning how to distribute books, and so I was just wondering, how do I get these books in the hands of like the scientists or the so-called scientists? And it is a community that is sort of pervaded by atheism. So how can I, you know, get them interested in Prabhupada's books, sort of without kind of mentioning God, you know? Is there even a way to do that?
I think it's a tough field to go and preach in, because I think one has to have a lot of background knowledge. One has to understand their paradigm very well. But I think one powerful approach is that, like when you're reasoning with a person, if you can show that there's intelligence behind everything. So you're not saying God, but you're just saying there's intelligence, like, and there is this movement called the intelligence design movement. So if you're inclined to preach to these scientists, I would definitely recommend checking them out. Michael Behe is one of the leaders of them. And he's got very powerful arguments and scientific research, which is showing that, that there are certain things which cannot exist without an intelligence, that random chance cannot generate certain things. Just as an example, let's say we have like your blood clotting cascade. Like when you cut yourself, there is an enzyme which mixes with something in your cut, which then triggers something to go on, and that switches something else on, and that switches something else on. And this is a whole chain of enzymes and chemicals which control how much your blood clots. If it doesn't clot enough, in a tiny cut, you'll completely bleed out. If it clots too much, your whole body will clot up. So it has to be like really fine-tuned. So every single element in that whole chain has to be like it is now for it to function. If you just tamper with one single thing in that whole thing, you kill the individual. They did these tests on rats. And so therefore, how did this thing come about? By evolution. Evolution will not keep anything, according to their theory, if it does not infer you an advantage. Otherwise, there's nothing to keep it for. And this thing can only give an advantage if the entire system exists as it is now. But one single thing missing, useless. There will be no pressure to keep it if there's no advantage. In fact, it can actually harm you. So this is a very powerful example that this is very complex. Chance cannot account for this. And there are many, many, many such examples. So you can look at that, like the flagellum, the tail of the bacteria, for example, is another such thing. It is, so look into those kind of things and just try and, because God, say, well, let's not talk about God. That's very, very up there. Let's just bring it down to earth. Why are you alive? And why is that person dead? If you die right now, your body is chemically exactly the same as it was before it died. So why is this one dead and that one alive? Just get them to think like that. So why can't you make that one alive again? So there's something in there which made it alive. It's reasonable. It's logical. So I think these kind of approaches, they're very powerful. But also, you should also be able to identify when a person is not actually open-minded enough, not to waste time like on people, because some of them, they're completely closed. You could give all these like really good arguments. It could even be flawless. And because of their confirmation bias, they'll just like write it off. So it is, so if you can preach in that field, it would be very great, because I think Prabhupada said that they make very powerful devotees, these people from that intelligence. And Life Comes to Life is a good book. Get them to read that. Yeah. I hope that's okay. I think this is quite a broad subject, but I think one is that you try to just kind of reason with them like that, but don't assume that because they're studying science that they actually have a brain. Because a lot of people don't have reasoning abilities. They're like PhDs and stuff, but actually they're quite narrow-minded. They're not actually that smart. So it's like that. But I think even more powerful than that, if you make friends with people. If you make friends with people and they feel like you actually love and care for them, because they don't feel that from anybody else, then I think that will mean more than anything. And that can actually turn a person. That personalism, and that generosity, that just generous with your time and your energy and your love. It's a unique quality of the Vaishnav. Generosity. Right, good luck.
So we have another hand up from Karuna Sindhu Avatar Prabhu. So you can unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, how are you?
Hare Krishna. I'm good. Thank you.
Prabhu, my question is more on the side of astronomy and also touching on modern science. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me? Okay. So obviously now with the introduction of SpaceX and the attempts to take people to Mars and colonize the Mars and want to, basically live out the scientific sci-fi fiction fantasies. Now a lot of people nowadays are beginning to take more interest into science, but obviously modern day science. And now obviously shunning out more the spiritualists such as ourselves, who have so much information in the Vedas about the planetary systems, so-called evidence of what the planets look like. There's no life there. We know that there's life there, but from their perspective, we are wrong. And obviously it creates this polarization between people who are spiritualists and scientists. But now I want to know, like, if there was any harmony between spiritualists and scientists, how would one go about to do that? Because the way that we can have peace is if you accept my way of living. And because I recently had a talk with one of my friend's father, and he's a scientist, very atheistic, but when I explained to him with the reason, like every time he asked me a question, I explained to him, and it makes sense, but he just won't accept it because it's got something to do with God. He just won't accept it, even though I've given him a valid answer. His family around him accepts, okay, no, he's right. Still, he won't understand and won't accept, and they rather place their faith into someone like Elon Musk or whatnot. Why is that? Why do they do that? And how can we actually ever grow from fighting each other to actually living with one another?
Well, I think the reason why people are like that is because they're envious of God and hard-hearted. And I think also, like in the broader scheme of like atheists and stuff, we don't have to live with them. Why do we have to live with them? It's people can get along fine, you know. If we live over here and they live over there, that's fine, you know. Let them do what they want to do over there. Let them not disturb us. And people who want to squander their human form of life, let them go there. But we can send our little infiltrators there as well, but not let them disturb the society of Vaishnavas. So they don't have to be together. I think that's maybe also one thing. But let's say someone like your father, I don't think necessarily he's like that type of person. So how to then, you know, in harmony? I think it is that a friend. Okay. Your friend's father. Sorry. Okay. It might as well be your father. Okay. So I think with people like that, we should compassionately see the level where they are at. It is, if they're not on the spiritual platform, but that doesn't mean we don't have to be on the spiritual platform. And we can see them, even if they can't see us. So that means you can hold that Bhagavatam truth like in your heart. And when you're dealing with this person, you're a well-wisher. In your heart, you're just thinking, I just wish this person well, and I just wish, you know, that they would not waste this opportunity that they have here to like take advantage of this amazing process of bliss. So, and then in that sense, just like, you know, be a friend to them. I mean, if they ask questions and stuff, that's good. But normally with relatives and people who are older than us, we should not tell them anything unless they've actually asked us a question. And then we should answer the question only and not like go beyond the boundary of the question that was intended, because then it might seem preachy. Because if somebody asks you a question, that means they're actually opening up their mind for that knowledge. So then you can just like nicely, neatly packaged, you know, go in like a needle, come out like a plow. It is, and then, so usually with older people and family members, that's the way. And if you are living like a sadhu, naturally it will invoke questions. And I think that itself will actually affect them more than anything you can tell them. Just when they see your behavior, and every time you come back, you're just more and more, you know, effulgent and more like full of life and beautiful. And then they like, wow, what is that? You know, this in the mind they're thinking, you know, what is this person doing? How can it be? It is so, but in terms of like the harmony between them, I think that the harmony is that that we also know they have their free will. Krishna has given it to them, and they can do whatever they want and suffer the consequences as well. But do not disturb me in my spiritual practice. Do not come and impose laws where I can't do kirtan. Do not do things like that. I think that's stepping the line, and for that, it's actually worth fighting for. Because in this world, it's like that, you know, in this world, fighting has to happen. So, yeah. So it's a tricky one, especially if it's somebody that, I don't know how close you are with this friend's father, But I think depending on the closeness of the relationship will determine how much you can and cannot do. And I think even if he's not convinced, convincing someone is not so important. There's a saying that goes, someone convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So you might smash somebody intellectually, but that's not going to change their heart. It's like nobody ever made a Facebook post and somebody read it and thought, wow, I'm going to change my whole life because of this. It's like, it's not that, it doesn't happen. It's like, it's association actually. So I think therefore the best thing is your association and prasad and prasadam. And that will turn the heart, you know. And then maybe, you know, in the next life, whatever he can come in contact again with it. But it's not ordinary, you know, that somebody comes to a devotee and asks a question.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. So we just have, I think, just some comments and one more question. So via Facebook from Narottam Prabhu, Hare Krishna Priyad Mrdanga Prabhu, so good to hear from you. Very informative talk. And then Savya Sachi Prabhu, just in the chat box for everyone, just included some 3 books to check out that they can see. And then from Awusa Admin, the question is, how modern is modern day science?
Modern is modern day science. Well, I guess the word modern means now, right? So since we are now here, that's modern. And then what's futuristic now will be modern then. So I'm not sure if I understand the question properly, but I think it's pretty much in the thinking is very much reflective of the collective consciousness right now, that everybody is completely engrossed in material pursuits and material desires. And therefore, they've given these people the power to do that stuff and to basically realize their own dreams. It's, you know, all of this world is a manifestation of our collective desires. And that's why we've taken birth here, is because we had the desires to live like this. As crazy as that will seem, you know, maybe it sounded like a good idea then, but now it's like, wow, not such a great idea after all. But it's like that. Krishna fulfills our desires. That's why they're the different yugas, and we take birth according to those desires and also qualification. So yeah, the modern science today is just really an expression of the collective consciousness wanting to be godless. Like Prabhupada said, you know, these politicians that are cheating the people, is just Krishna giving them the result for their desire for a godless society. Because this is what happens when there's godlessness. You get politicians like we have now that exploit people. So, and people desire that. So Krishna's fulfilling their desire. So this is the result. It's not Krishna's fault. It's like we're the ones who wanted it. It's like, but yeah, why would I want something like that? Yeah, it's called madness. Mada. It's madness. It's madness to want this. It's like that, that's what it means, you know. Why would you want it? No sane person would. But we are here, I guess we're not so sane. So it's at least we've taken shelter by this process. So I think there's some we're taking the remedy. So I think in that sense, I think modern science is very modern in keeping up with the modern trend of being more and more materialistic and godless, and also avoiding the facts and also avoiding our own responsibility for the mess that we're in, because people like to do that also. And science is just a voice for that. So I think in that sense, I don't know if that answered the question properly, but I think it's really keeping up with the times. And I think the last thing is, don't trust the scientists, trust the Bhagavatam. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.